Just gradually refining as I go. Sometimes one thing changes and you see some other things that have to change a little bit. Just wiping out, adding on, refining my drawing as I go. Don't want to rush this stage. It'll save you all kinds of hassle later on if you just take some time with this stage. Not much of this will show through in the final painting. If some of it does, it's fine, because it's just pure pigment anyway. So if there are areas that end up being left when I put the next layers on, that is okay. But for the most part, this is just forming a map for future layers. And that seems to be pretty much the first layer. I've got everything where I want it now. There'll be, let me wipe out a little bit more in the ear area because some of these areas are quite a bit lighter. There will, of course, be refining that goes on with the next layers. And a dampened Q-tip to refine those shapes. And that should be it for now, for this layer. So now I can come in with paint that is just slightly diluted with water-soluble linseed oil. If you can't get the water-soluble linseed oil, you can still use regular linseed oil, even if you're using a water-soluble paint. You'll be using so little of it that your paint should still remain easy enough to clean up with water. I just barely dip into the puddle of linseed oil. I use quite a few brushes when I'm painting this next layer. So I'll get a stack of these. I'm using these softer #2 brushes, and I like to have several on the go so I can have one for the darkest colors and another one for the next darkest, and anytime I change colors I'll have a new brush so that it stays nice and fresh. So I'll start with my darkest colors here. Doing the nose and the eyes. Easy to get a really nice black color with my mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna when I add just a touch of the linseed oil, and it just slides on over the base layer. You could, of course, let that base layer dry and work on it later. I like working into the wet paint. I like the way the paint slides around. A lot of artists will let a layer dry and then come back, so it's entirely up to you. It's just a different process. I like to be able to move the paint around. And in many ways, I like to just lay it on and leave it too, which is another thing that works well with wet paint. Just going to wipe out a little highlight in the eye, a little bit of reflected light underneath, and then the highlight itself. Again, I will come back and forth with those, starting with just a little bit of a light color with some blue added to it. Because the sky would reflect into the top of the eye first. And then in the other area of reflected light on the bottom, I'll be using this rusty brown kind of color. And we've got a little bit of an area where the horse's eye is pulled back and there's a bit of the white of the eye showing, which isn't exactly white, it's quite a red brown with a little bit of white added. So we'll put that in. Sometimes if you get some of the details in first, after you've got your placement, of course, it kind of helps you with the rest of the painting. Get the horse so he can look at me while I paint him. Just a little bit of a white of the eye showing. I'll go back and restate the pupil. Any other darks that might need to be restated there. And then I'm going to use just a tiny little brush. Let me grab that to put that white in the eye. It's sometimes just as easy to use the edge of that square brush, but for some reason it wasn't working so great this morning. So just a little bit of a white tinted ever so slightly with blue, and I will just touch it, and if that dot ends up too large, which it always does, I can take it down with a little black.